I've seen a really good ROI on getting prospects engaged with an incentive, and also maybe those long lapsed folks, because, everyone likes a little something from the organization.
I'm Rich Frazier.
And I'm Russ Fanos.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement.
We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector.
Let's dive in.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Today, we're continuing our conversation about peer-to-peer fundraising, this time focusing on the best practices and how to get your nonprofit started with a successful P2P fundraising campaign. To recap, P2P fundraising is a strategy that allows individual donors to create their own fundraising campaigns on behalf of a nonprofit and then reach out to their personal networks to get involved and ask for donations.
In our previous episode, we talked about the benefits of P2P fundraising for nonprofits, as well as benefits to the donors. So we talked about some of the challenges that nonprofits face running a P2P campaign. We talked about the solutions to those challenges and also future trends and some of the technology that can help P2P campaigns. Listeners, it's a really great episode. So in case you missed it, you can go back into our podcast feed and find it. We'll also include a link in our show notes. And we're really excited to have our guests back on this show. Sadé, Dozan, and Sarah Murry. Could you remind our listeners about your background with peer-to-peer fundraising? Sarah?
Yes, I have been in fundraising for more years than I should even admit, but as far as peer-to-peer fundraising, it's something I've been really ingrained in the last 6 years. And when I started launching a huge platform and a huge campaign for a big hospital, it brought in so much excitement and so much engagement. And the last 6 years truly have been focused on that and bringing in the people who, just like all of us, or me personally, I can't make a large donation somewhere. However, I have a network of people who can do some incredible things. So that's one of the most important things we have to learn. And remember, when we are encouraging people to create a campaign or to create a fundraiser, you can do this. And I'm kind of proof that it happens on some level.
Sadé.
Thanks. I'm Sadé, back again. So excited to be here. And I've been doing fundraising for well over 10 years. I've done everything from that grassroots canvasser that's like stopped you in the middle of the street, all the way to mobilizing everyone in my contact list to donate to a campaign. So I'm pretty steeped in the individual giving peer-to-peer work, and I'm really excited to dig in.
Excellent. Well, welcome back to you both. We are excited to dig into an even deeper layer of P2P fundraising today. And I think before we jump in to the meat and potatoes of it, I want to start by asking you both a question that we really didn't have time to get to last time. And that's in, all your years of running P2P campaigns, what do you think the most important lesson is that you've learned that you wish you'd known when you were first getting started?
That the meta-narrative is important. I would say that one of the first things that I learned that it was a hard lesson to learn was, what are you asking people to do and why is it important? And what is the theme throughout the work is so key. So the meta-narrative, the ultimate drumbeat of communication is essential.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And the other thing with peer-to-peer that I learned is just because you build it doesn't mean people come in there and figure out exactly how to do it. You have to message it. You have to talk about it. You have to train people. You have to show excitement, success, and storytell, just like you were saying, Sadé. It's that narrative of why.
So let's assume that someone's listening right now who's never run a P2P fundraising campaign, but wants to get started. What advice would you give to them? What are the key pieces they need to have in place in order to successfully launch a P2P campaign?
I think this is one of the topics we discussed on the last episode, is that giving them all the information, giving them a toolkit, giving them something that's created by your organization that they can share, and they share your message and your brand. I think that's very important. And then of course, training your team on how peer-to-peer works so they can talk to any of their fundraisers within peer-to-peer.
Yeah, I would say being really clear about what the story is, like what's the meta narrative, what's the drumbeat, and what are you working towards? Like, what's the money for? Like, what's the goal? Like, what are you raising $1 million? You're raising $100,000? Like, what are you trying to achieve here?
Yeah.
So I think the what and the why need to be the first thing that you figure out. And then everything stems from that, like who you're approaching, who the donors that you're targeting are, and the kind of like the asks that come out of that all stem from that greater logic.
Okay. What timing wise, what do you look at in terms of the calendar? Because I imagine that, when you're recruiting people to get involved and to come on board as, a primary donor and someone who's kind of taking the reins of getting their network involved, what kind of horizon do you have for those people? Is it 6 months? Is it a full year? Can you really keep someone engaged that long? Or does it need to be kind of condensed down a little bit more into kind of more of like a micro campaign?
Yeah, my answer is always go with a micro campaign.
Yeah.
You can probably so again, like it's the what are you working towards? So you could have a major campaign that maybe has 3 or 4 micro campaigns built in. That's something that you can internally figure out. But I don't even try. 30 days is too long for most people. So I feel like you also miss the urgency around it.
Right.
Like if you're like, I need you to get your folks rallied around this thing, there needs to be a sense of urgency. So I try to do smaller micro campaigns that are about a month or so long.
Okay.
I agree with that. It's the urgency, and it builds excitement.
Yeah.
And that's what these folks want to see. And while we can engage them for 6 months, a year, what have you, for their campaign, we want it to be the short, tight amount of time because we don't want them to get bored with it or think they're taking on too much. If you put something in a 30-day timeline, you get it out there, you bolster excitement. And that's kind of some of like what the toolkits can help with is week 1, week 2, 3, 4, this is how you can do it.
And do you typically kind of work your way up to a signature event or some kind of, like I know a lot of organizations will do a walk or a 5K, or they'll have a gala at the end of it, or they'll have something that kind of signals the end of the line for this campaign. Is that something that you typically build into it, or do you find that it can kind of live on its own?
Well, what's tricky with walks, and some of my first career jobs in not-for-profit were with big walks.
Mm-hmm.
And with those, you just never know when people are going to come in and register. So you don't know how much time before the actual event you get to coach them and cheer them on and do all of that.
Yeah.
But I think when people come into an event like that and they register and they get that page, they want to be told exactly what to do or how to do it. They want these resources,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so hard. Like it's so hard to really glean from every different individual exactly how they want to communicate.
Yeah, it's kind of like on a rolling basis.
Right. And again, one of the things we've talked about in the past is the fear of asking. And I think peer-to-peer is the best way because you can send an email. A lot of platforms allow for you to send a text or post on social,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really, getting them to buy into how easy and fun this can be. And people don't realize until they get a donation from somebody how engaged they are and how they truly care about the person they're making this donation in honor of.
Yeah.
I've done it either way. Like I've done it where it's like in preparation of like a race or a walk or something. And then
Mm-hmm.
I've also done it where it lives into itself. I think again, it's about what that clear end goal is. So for example, if it's a micro giving, like if it's a peer-to-peer campaign around like a scholarship fund, you set your goal, you're really clear about the ending impact and what you're working towards and rallying that as like the cause. So as long as you're really clear about what the finish line looks like, I think it can be tied to really anything.
Okay.
I like that term, like you're clear about the finish line.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect way to say that because that motivates people to get to that finish line.
So in our last episode, Russ sort of jokingly referred to peer-to-peer fundraising as the self-checkout of fundraising, which kind of implies a lack of engagement with the donor, right? And I mention that because with all of that technology that's available to us and the platforms that we can use for peer-to-peer fundraising, some organizations that are new to peer-to-peer might tend to over-rely on the technology and forget about the relationships. So there's some danger there, isn't there?
Yeah, I believe in automation to a point, right? Like I believe in scheduling out messages and having those like prompts go out. Part of it is, yes, you want to be mindful of your staff capacity, but also you don't want the donor to just feel like they're just in a never-ending queue of like rotating alerts. So I think that there's something also about that human connection that's really important. If you have the ability to have staff to reach out, send an email that's not just like formatted and comes from a MailChimp, I definitely would do that. Use social media as a leveraging tool where you have real conversations with your donors and your followers. So I think of it as using technology as a tool for engagement and not just like a distraction automation tactic.
Right.
Right. I agree with that too. And we can't just rely on an email or a text message, because at the heart of it, people do want to hear from an organization. Even if they're giving donations online, we've had a lot of success in speaking to our donors and thanking them out loud regardless. So I definitely agree with that. And you're a longtime fundraiser too. So you know that one of the things we were taught are those 7 touches before someone gives a gift. And people do like a very personal connection. And I've always loved to reach out to some of our peer-to-peer fundraisers so they can tell their story, whether it's about their child who, had a birthday and they created these events and campaigns around a birthday, and they love to tell their stories. And that's something I think that's where the personal touch really needs to come in, is reaching out, thanking them and asking them, why did you do it in your own words? And can we tell your story to everyone else who you might inspire?
Yeah.
So we talked about having good preparation leading up to a PTP campaign, good communication with your participants, not over relying on technology. We've talked about supporting participants. Are there other things that first timers should be on the lookout for in terms of setting up their P2P campaigns?
I think it's more of opportunities, not so much mistakes, but I think the biggest opportunity that people have that, again, they are afraid of sometimes is making that ask or not knowing how to make that ask and not feeling confident enough in it. So that's why we as fundraisers, we need to give anyone who's creating these campaigns for us, every bit of information they could possibly need to tell a story, talk about the mission, and they don't feel so jaded by asking people.
I think it's important to have a well-equipped donor. So I love the idea of making sure that they have resources and information, but I think it's also really important for the nonprofit to keep in mind the resources that they also need, which includes information. I find that oftentimes nonprofits will like launch a P2P campaign and then like they'll raise money and then like that's it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you have to do so much like debriefing and check-ins and like reflections and really understand the data, because that'll help you later on evaluate what worked, what didn't work. Yes, some lists love a good video, some lists love photos, some lists love kind of funny humor, but you don't know what your donors like until you reflect and kind of improve upon it,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like almost like segmentation, like we do in email appeals. We really have to do it for some of these peer-to-peer fundraisers. Look at what their motivation is, look at all the different metrics of how the campaign went, their donors, all of that.
Hi, this is Curtis Schmidt, producer of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, then we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM Advancement, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
Well, let's talk a little bit about best practices. And I'm going to run down my cheat sheet of best practices. And I would like you both to just chime in or refute what I'm going to say or support it. But what do you think about these best practices? So we talked about a few of these. First is set clear goals and have a plan. The second is to empower your supporters to become kind of brand evangelists or ambassadors. We talked about resources, how important it is to provide resources, toolkits, things like that, and support for people so they don't feel like they're on their own. We talked about communication, how important it is to keep people engaged throughout the process. What we didn't really touch on too much is incentives and recognition. So I want to come back to that. And then we just talked about evaluating and making continuous improvements to the campaign. So which one of those trips your trigger? And let's especially zero in on incentives and recognition.
Oh, I love a good incentives conversation because I've certainly seen them work in different situations. I think it's important. I've seen a really good ROI on getting prospects engaged with an incentive, and also maybe those long lapsed folks, because we reach out in a different way. And, everyone likes a little something from the organization. Mm-hmm. They like to have that swag, then they can show it off on some level, but I think it's situational for sure. And with peer-to-peer, that's something I really have never dipped my toe into is, at this, we've seen the walks, and at this level you get, a water bottle or that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to incentivize people, especially when you want to engage them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love swag. I love swag premiums. I also think that it's really impressive what a water bottle will do for the level of competition amongst donors. It's kind of is. So I think that people love things, love the idea of a goal or a prize, and they love premiums and incentives like that.
Yeah.
But also I've found that, and I've had donors that have actually sent me photos of the really sweet package with the t-shirts and the mugs. They loved that. So it reminds them fondly of the nonprofit. And also, so it works both ways. It's supporting competition, and then also as a brand awareness tactic. So I do think that incentives, premiums, swags are really important.
How do you focus on recognition? So kind of more along the lines of, I'm thinking, the stewardship aspect of it. Maybe when everything is said and done, the campaign's over, how do you get back to people and recognize them and show that appreciation?
Yeah, I've done things in previous newsletters, I've done a donor highlight corner. Mm-hmm. I've done social media shout outs. You ask people what the level of comfort they have.
Yeah.
And then you kind of respond based off of that. The person who got the most number of donors gets a shout out. I've also, if there's a smaller nonprofit, I'll do first time rock stars, which encourages them to participate in future years.
Yeah.
So I do those sort of kind of badges and social media shout outs, and leveraging digital to kind of amplify our praise.
Yeah.
Based on the comfort level. And I think that that's also good to be acknowledged, but then also if you're thinking about the donor psychology of it, other folks who may not have leaned in see that recognition and then are more inclined to participate later.
Yeah, everybody wants to get to that t-shirt level. They want to raise that money and be able to represent the organization. I think especially in those kind of endurance type events, we also have a really good opportunity to give out incentives, and then within whatever we're doing in a toolkit or in our communication, say, hey, share what you did online, share your package that you received, because it'll hype people to do the same thing and to fundraise and to get that swag. Everybody loves swag.
Yeah.
All my water bottles I have, what I'm drinking out of today is something I got from a race or something.
Yeah. And it also sounds like there's an opportunity to maybe within those toolkits, remind those primary donors with those networks that part of fundraising is thanking people, and part of fundraising is sharing that appreciation. So that's something that, as people consider putting together toolkits, don't forget about the stewardship aspect of it and the follow-up aspect of it. Because I know personally, I have a friend who competes in well, doesn't really compete, but participates in one of these bicycle races that is, one of the biggest in the country. And every year, it's kind of the same thing that we get as his network. And it would be nice to kind of hear, hey, how did it go this year? What did you think? What kind of experience did you have out on the course? And those kinds of things kind of bring it to life and make it a lot less transactional, I think.
Yeah, donor engagement is just part of it. Like you need to talk to people throughout the year, regardless of whether or not you're asking them for money.
Yeah.
Like you cannot just come to someone and the only time they hear from you is when you're
Here
saying,
I am
hey,
again.
that can't be it. That can't be the solution.
Yeah.
I want to follow up on that, on the donor engagement, and look at this opportunity to bring new donors to the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a way for your existing donors to bring their network and their friends to share their passion for your organization. And these friends, their network, are new donors to your organization. And that's a great opportunity for the nonprofit.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Sarah and Sadé, what do you think about this new opportunity? And how do you engage those new donors?
I think that's where the best opportunity lies, is in these new donors who come in. And, I've worked with organizations who, once you make a donation, you are served with an incredible drip series of emails welcoming you in and telling the story in multiple parts of the organization, talking about the history, talking about patients or families or whatever your mission is focused on, but it engages them and it's not an ask. And I think you had mentioned that, Sadé. We can't continue to always be sending appeals, but here's some really great stories. I would actually love to dig through all of the data from the last X amount of years that I've been doing this to see how long people came in, stayed on the file, or have they made other donations? I've definitely seen it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great opportunity. But also what we have to remember is these folks who come in and make that first donation because it came through peer-to-peer, we have to remember that fundraiser who brought them in. And we have to treat them differently and speak to them differently than we would someone who was a sustainer or an annual donor or a monthly donor, because they came in a very different way.
Yeah.
And again, these people were inspired by someone they knew. So we have to talk to them and share more inspiring stories.
Can you give an example of that? How different might that communication look?
In an ideal world, what I would love to see is when, let's talk about, say we're doing an endurance event, say it's a walk, it's a 5K. And you had everyone creating peer-to-peer pages, and someone reaches out, they get a donor who is new to the organization. They don't know anything about it. Perhaps when the donor makes a gift, maybe there is something in your donation form that says, how did you hear about us? And they could say, through a peer-to-peer fundraiser, I've always known about your organization. It's a drop down of different ways they came in or different things they're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's number one, something you could do to understand what people's motivation is. So we take that drop down and we say, I'm doing this because one of my friends asked me. So we look at that and we say, okay, well, this is great. We're going to show you some other peer-to-peer fundraisers, other events that we've done. Here's the successes. Here's some really good images. Here are things that are going to motivate you. And then, again, I love a good drip series. I love something that gives that entree to someone new so they understand the organization. Mm-hmm. And some people are feared of those because a drip series can come rapid fire, but you just have to kind of think about and look at your rates, open rates, the worst thing in the world, unsubscribe rates, but you have to really look at that as a whole.
Yeah, I've also done things like I've sent the primary donor, I like that language. So I've sent the primary donor an option of virtual cards. I'm like, hey, we'd love to send thank yous out to the folks that were on your list. Which one of these do you like? Thank you so much. So then you kind of get them buy-in and engagement after. I'm all about long-term engagement. And so I'm like always thinking about ways to bring folks in. So like that's an example. I've done like virtual cards as a follow-up. I've done like 30-day later reflections where like I go like, thanks so much for participating. And then I ask them some random question about like, like what was the most difficult part? Or what was the like most fun part? Kind of like later to kind of get that on the top of their mind. And I think that those little moments are really important. And they also, again, thinking about how you can make something automated but not feel automated. That's a perfect example of something like that.
Well, with that being said, Sadé, I love that. Do you ever do surveys after campaigns or events? Because it's 50-50 from what I've done before. And do you think that feels impersonal, or what do you think about surveying people or fundraisers?
Yeah, I've done it a couple different ways. The one that I saw that actually worked really well was after we did the t-shirt premiums. So we were like, hey, you get a t-shirt. We then surveyed folks. Almost everyone qualified for a t-shirt. So when we asked them for their t-shirt size, we also kind of surveyed them. Ooh. And that seemed to work really well because people answered like, like I want a medium or whatever. And they also answered the secondary question.
I have chills because that is such a good idea. That'll get people survey first, t-shirt size at the end, boom. I love that.
I love the idea about including the primary donor in your communications with the new donors. In your experience, what retention rates have you seen with new donors? Sadé?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen anything from like 20 to 70. It kind of depends on the organization. I think the industry average is around like 40% or something like that. But I find that when I get P2Ps that feel super engaged, when they feel like they're valued, when they see a direct difference, when there's follow-up around impact, posts like 30 days out and 6 months out. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, earlier this year, you participated in that. I see engagement and click rates go up. So I feel like the more points between the asks make it retention like a higher likelihood.
Great. Well, listen, this has been another excellent conversation on peer-to-peer fundraising. And normally we do takeaways at the end of these discussions, but I want to switch it up a little bit and ask you each to just maybe share some encouraging words for listeners who want to start their own P2P fundraising campaigns, or maybe they've inherited one and they need to work within it now and improve it. What would you give those folks in terms of encouraging words?
My encouraging words would be to have fun with it. Prepare and plan, but really have fun with it and treat it as something that ultimately you want to do every year. This is something that you obviously have excitement with the mission and you're invested in it, but no matter what, just have fun, because if you don't have fun with fundraising, but the fun in fundraising, as they say, then you won't want to do it again. And it's not as scary as it seems, and it's fun, and people do want to support you in the things that you love, just as we all do.
Yeah.
And Sadé?
Yeah, I'm going to say you can do it. And I find that as a fundraiser, sometimes we just need to hear, like, you got it, you can do it.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. Be organized, because that will be your greatest superpower in the pipeline. Mm-hmm. And think through how every action gets you towards that overarching goal. So keep that clear goal as your North Star.
Wonderful. Well, what a great conversation. And I think, Rich, I'm like I said in the last episode, I think I'm coming around on P2P fundraising. I really think it's for me, I kind of came into both of these conversations thinking, it's like GoFundMe, it's the self-checkout of fundraising. But if you really focus on delivering a good experience for people, then it does have some value. And it does seem to be where a lot of people are moving in terms of, the trends. People want to be empowered. They want to feel like they're in control of, the way that they interact with organizations and the way that they make their mark.
And there's a whole lot more passion behind peer-to-peer fundraising than there isn't the self-checkout line at Walmart, isn't there, Russ?
Yeah.
And a lot more engagement as well, thanks to folks like Sarah and Sadé. Hey, it's so nice to be on the show again with you two. Thank you for joining us. Remind us again where folks can find you. Sadé, let's start with you.
I'm on LinkedIn. Find me, talk to me. I love to share ideas and give advice, sometimes unsolicited. Feel free to locate me and always follow my organization, Caring Across Generations.
Thank you, Sadé.
And Sarah Murry, where can we find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's Sarah with an H and Murry without an A. So check me out on LinkedIn. And again, just like Sadé, I'm always happy to help, always ready to give unsolicited advice and, talk not for profit and the ways you can really do anything. It's exciting and it's fun. And I appreciate y'all having us.
Thank you both for coming back and having these conversations. This has been great.
Yeah, 3 more episodes and you get this special lounge jacket, just like on Saturday Night Live.
I love it.
I love a good premium.
You love a good premium. We know that about you. We want to thank you again for joining us. And thank you to our producer, Curtis Schmidt. Russ, it's always a pleasure to see you because you know why?
I could guess, but I don't know if we want to share it with the listeners.
Because there ain't no sunshine when you're gone, my friend. Always good to see you.
Always good to see you. You can find me, Rich, on LinkedIn, and I'll think about accepting you into my network.
That's good.
Thanks, everybody.
And to you, our listeners, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
Bye-bye.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.